If everyone is afraid of the same person, either that person is dangerous or everyone else is wrong. The Grand Meridian Bazaar stretched for nearly half a mile beneath a vaulted dome of glass and steel, its curved panels glowing amber with the light of a distant artificial sunset. Thousands of voices blended into a constant hum. Traders shouted prices in half a dozen languages. Cargo drones drifted overhead with soft mechanical whines. The scent of roasted spice roots mixed with machine oil and recycled air. Ethan Carter moved through the crowd with his hands buried in the pockets of his worn gray jacket, following no particular destination. His freighter, the Wayfarer, was docked for routine repairs, and for the first time in weeks he had nowhere he needed to be. At 38, Ethan had learned that sometimes wandering without a plan was the closest thing a working man got to a vacation. He passed stalls selling crystalline sculptures, antique navigation charts, and exotic fruits that glowed faintly beneath display lights. Everywhere he looked, people were bargaining, laughing, arguing, living. Then he noticed the silence. It sat in the middle of the bazaar like a hole punched through reality. The crowd flowed around a circular platform as if avoiding a patch of fire. No one stopped. No one lingered. Most didn't even look directly at it. Ethan frowned and adjusted course. The platform stood about 3 feet above the floor. A faded sign hung above it. The letters were large enough to read from 50 feet away. Take her for free. Ethan slowed. Standing beneath the sign was a young alien woman. Her skin carried a faint turquoise sheen beneath the overhead lights. Long silver hair fell across her shoulders in loose waves. She wore a simple gray travel cloak that looked several sizes too large. Nothing about her appearance suggested danger. Nothing explained why dozens of shoppers deliberately crossed the aisle to avoid passing too close. She stood perfectly still. Not angry. Not frightened. Just tired. The kind of tired that settled deeper than sleep could fix. Beside the platform sat an elderly merchant behind a folding desk. He looked relieved whenever. People walked away. Ethan approached. "What's the catch?" he asked. The merchant nearly jumped. "No catch." Ethan glanced toward the woman. "Nobody gives away anything valuable. She costs nothing." "That wasn't my question." The merchant's expression tightened. For a moment, he seemed ready to say something. Instead, he looked away. "Take her or don't. Makes no difference to me." Ethan studied him. The man wasn't lying. He was hiding. Around them, the bazaar continued its endless motion. Yet every few seconds, Ethan caught someone staring toward the platform before quickly looking elsewhere. Fear. Not hatred. Not disgust. Fear. The woman finally lifted her eyes. They were violet. Not bright or dramatic. Just quietly observant. Like someone watching rain through a window. "You should keep walking," she said softly. Her translator rendered the words in calm American English. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That your sales pitch?" Something almost resembling a smile flickered across her face before disappearing. "No." Her gaze drifted toward the crowd. "Just advice." A cargo drone passed overhead, casting moving shadows across the platform. For an instant, Ethan noticed something strange. Every person within sight seemed careful not to meet her eyes for long, like they were following a rule no one had spoken aloud. He looked back at the sign, "Take her for free," then back at the woman. And for the first time all afternoon, Ethan Carter felt that peculiar sensation that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. Curiosity. The longer Ethan stood there, the stranger the scene became. A family passed within 10 feet of the platform. The parents gently guided their 2 children to the opposite side of the aisle without a word. A delivery worker pushing a cart loaded with metal containers noticed the silver-haired woman and immediately changed direction, choosing a longer route through the crowded market. Nobody shouted insults. Nobody threw accusations. They simply avoided her. That unsettled Ethan more than open hostility ever could. He rested an elbow on the edge of the platform and looked at the elderly merchant again. "Let me guess," he said. "Everyone here knows something I do not." The merchant sighed heavily. His shoulders seemed to sag beneath an invisible weight. "Everyone thinks they know something." Ethan noticed the careful wording. "And you?" The merchant hesitated. The silence stretched. Finally, he rubbed his forehead. "I think people are afraid. Of her. Of what they believe follows her." Ethan glanced toward the young woman. She had not moved. Her eyes remained fixed somewhere beyond the crowd, as if she had spent years watching people leave. "That sounds like superstition." Most superstitions begin with a story. And what story is that? The merchant immediately shook his head. Not mine to tell. A soft announcement echoed through the bazaar overhead. Incoming freighters had begun docking at the eastern port. The crowd shifted as travelers moved toward the transit corridors. Ethan watched the flow of people for a moment before noticing something unusual. A small maintenance drone had become tangled in a decorative banner above a nearby storefront. Its stabilizers sputtered unevenly. The machine jerked left and right, struggling to free itself. Several shoppers stepped back. Then, almost without warning, the drone stabilized. The tangled fabric slipped loose. The machine drifted away smoothly as if nothing had happened. Ethan frowned. The merchant frowned too. Both men had witnessed the same thing. The woman lowered her gaze toward the floor. A strange expression crossed her face. Not surprise. Not satisfaction. More like embarrassment. Ethan filed the moment away. "What is your name?" he asked. Her eyes lifted again. "Lasara. I am Ethan." "I know. You do?" The dock registry displays arriving crews. Ethan laughed quietly. "Fair enough." For the first time, another faint smile touched her lips. It lasted less than a second. Yet somehow it transformed her entire face. Not because she suddenly looked happier. Because it revealed how long it had been since she had smiled at all. Then the smile vanished. The distance returned. "You should leave, Ethan Carter. You already said that. And you ignored me. I usually do not take advice from strangers. That habit may become expensive." Ethan folded his arms. "Then tell me why." Lasara looked past him toward the moving crowd. For several seconds, she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above the hum of the market. "Because every person who stays eventually regrets it." Something in the way she said those words made Ethan stop smiling. There was no threat in her tone. No manipulation. Only certainty. The certainty of someone repeating a lesson life had taught too many times. Above them, market lights shifted gradually from amber toward evening blue. The artificial sunset deepened across the vaulted ceiling. Around the platform, the crowd continued to avoid her. And for reasons he could not yet explain, Ethan Carter became more convinced than ever that the entire bazaar was wrong. The old merchant stared at Ethan as though he had just announced plans to walk into an airlock without a suit. "You are still here," he muttered. "That is becoming increasingly unusual." Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn credit chip. It was not worth much. Certainly not enough to change anyone's life. He placed it on the folding desk between them. The merchant looked down, then up again. "What is this?" "A transaction," Ethan said. "You said she costs nothing." "She does." "Then consider this a courtesy fee." The merchant did not touch the chip. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. Around them, a few nearby shoppers slowed their pace. Word traveled fast in places like this. The moment someone did something unexpected, people noticed. "You do not understand," the merchant said quietly. "Probably not. Human, I am giving you an opportunity to walk away." Ethan shrugged. "I have ignored opportunities before." For the first time, genuine frustration crossed the merchant's face. He leaned closer. "Then at least listen. Once she leaves with you, there are no refunds. No returns. No appeals. She is a person, not cargo." The merchant closed his eyes briefly. "That answer is exactly why this is happening." Ethan glanced toward Lasara. She had gone very still. Not surprised. Not hopeful. If anything, she looked resigned. Like someone watching a familiar disaster unfold. "Do you want to leave?" Ethan asked her. Her violet eyes met his. The noise of the bazaar seemed to fade around them. "That is not the question you should ask. It is the one I asked." Several seconds passed. Then she answered, "Yes." The word was barely louder than a whisper. Ethan nodded once. Decision made. He slid the credit chip another inch across the desk. The merchant stared at it as though it carried some hidden danger. Finally he picked it up. His fingers trembled. Not from greed. Relief. Pure relief. A nearby trader witnessed the exchange and nearly dropped the crate he was carrying. Two shoppers stopped walking altogether. A woman standing near a food stall covered her mouth. The reaction spread outward through the crowd in ripples. Conversation slowed. Eyes turned toward the platform. Ethan suddenly felt like the only man in the room who had missed the first half of a very important story. The merchant activated a small scanner. A green light flashed across the chip. Transaction complete. That was it. No contract. No paperwork. No negotiations. Just a single credit and a silence heavy enough to bend steel. The merchant stood up so quickly his chair nearly tipped over. Then she is yours. Ethan frowned. Again, that sounds wrong. Then perhaps think of it this way. The merchant stepped back from the desk. She is no longer my responsibility. Those words lingered in the air. Not ownership. Escape. The distinction bothered Ethan more than he expected. Lasara slowly stepped down from the platform. The movement was simple, ordinary, yet dozens of people immediately cleared a path through the crowd. Nobody ordered them to move. Nobody needed to. Ethan watched the corridor open before her like water parting around a stone. She stopped beside him. You really should not have done that, she said softly. Ethan adjusted the strap of his travel bag and started walking toward the docking district. Maybe. Lasara fell into step beside him. Behind them, the merchant sank into his chair and released a breath that sounded years old. Ahead, beyond the glowing corridors of the bazaar, waited the wayfarer, and neither of them noticed the hundreds of eyes quietly following their departure. The docking district occupied the lower levels of the station where the polished elegance of the bazaar gave way to exposed support beams, cargo lifts, and the steady hum of industrial machinery. Ethan preferred it immediately. Steel made sense. Engines made sense. People rarely did. The wayfarer rested inside docking bay 27, its dark hull showing the wear of countless freight runs across settled space. Maintenance lights glowed beneath the ship, casting long reflections across the metal floor. As Ethan approached, a service technician stepped away from an open access panel and raised a hand in greeting. Your coolant system is finally behaving itself, the technician called. Then his eyes landed on Lasara. The smile disappeared. Not gradually. Instantly. Ethan noticed it. So did Lasara. The technician suddenly found a reason to return to his tools. Ethan watched him climb beneath the ship without another word. You were right, Ethan said quietly. People really are afraid of you. I told you. You still have not explained why. Lasara looked toward the freighter. Because explanations rarely change anything. The cargo ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss as Ethan activated the remote control. Warm light spilled from the interior. Nothing impressive waited inside. A narrow galley. 2 sleeping quarters. Storage compartments. Scuffed metal floors. The accumulated clutter of a man who spent more time traveling than settling. To Ethan, it felt like home. Lasara paused at the bottom of the ramp. You are inviting me aboard? That was generally the plan. You are not worried? Ethan laughed softly. About what? She did not answer. That silence again. The kind that seemed to contain entire conversations she refused to have. Ethan stepped onto the ramp. After a moment, she followed. Inside, the ship smelled faintly of coffee, machine lubricant, and recycled air. Ethan tossed his travel bag onto a chair. Kitchen is there. Bathroom is down the hall. If anything breaks, tell me before it catches fire. Comforting. I try. A tiny maintenance robot rolled out from beneath a storage cabinet. The machine was barely 2 feet tall and covered in scratches from years of repairs. Its optical sensor flashed blue. Welcome back, Captain Carter, it chirped. Current probability of catastrophic system failure has been reduced to 12%. See, Ethan said. Good news all around. Lasara stared at the robot. For the first time since leaving the bazaar, genuine curiosity appeared on her face. The robot rotated toward her. Unidentified passenger detected. Greetings. Then something strange happened. The robot froze for half a second. Its damaged left wheel, which had squeaked for months, spun smoothly. The grinding noise vanished completely. The machine rolled forward in perfect silence. Ethan blinked. Well, that is new. The robot paused. Diagnostic update. Mechanical fault resolved. Ethan crouched beside it. Resolved how? Unknown. He tapped the side of its casing. Nothing. No loose components. No repair patch. No explanation. The wheels simply worked. Ethan slowly looked up. Lasara had taken a step backward. Her expression had tightened. I should leave, she said. You just got here. I am serious. So am I. Ethan stood. You are not sleeping in a cargo terminal. That would be safer. For who? The question lingered between them. Outside the ship, freight loaders moved through the docking bay beneath rows of bright white lights. Inside, the repaired robot quietly resumed its duties as if nothing unusual had happened. Lasara lowered her eyes. You keep asking questions you do not want the answers to. Ethan leaned against the galley counter and folded his arms. Funny thing is, I think I do. The station's artificial night cycle settled across the docking district 3 hours later. Through the observation ports, distant freighters drifted between fields of white navigation lights while maintenance crews finished their shifts beneath the glow of industrial flood lamps. Inside the Wayfarer, the atmosphere felt strangely calm. Ethan sat at the galley table with a half-finished cup of coffee and a maintenance manual open on a data screen. Across from him, Lasara quietly studied the ship. Not the way a passenger would. The way someone examined a place they never expected to be welcomed into. The little repair robot rolled back and forth along the corridor without a single squeak. Ethan still could not get over that. For nearly 2 years the machine had sounded like a shopping cart with a broken wheel. Now it moved silently. He closed the manual and looked toward Lasara. Do you always have this effect on machinery? She lowered her gaze. Sometimes. That is not a normal answer. I have never lived a normal life. Ethan could not argue with that. A soft chime echoed from the galley console. The ship's environmental monitor displayed a status update. Air quality had improved by 3%. Power efficiency was up by 4. Minor fluctuations, but unusual enough to catch his attention. He frowned and opened a diagnostic panel. Everything appeared healthier than it had that morning. Systems that normally required constant adjustment were suddenly operating near optimal levels. That is impossible, he muttered. I know, Lasara said quietly. Ethan looked up. She already knew what he had found. The realization settled heavily between them. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Ethan stood and crossed toward a small storage shelf near the galley. From it, he retrieved a neglected plant growing inside a cracked ceramic container. The poor thing had spent months surviving on minimal light and occasional forgotten watering. Several leaves had already turned brown. All right, Ethan said. Let us test a theory. He placed the plant on the table. Lasara immediately tensed. Do not. Why? Because if it happens again, you will ask more questions. That is generally how curiosity works. A sigh escaped her. Not annoyed. Tired. Ethan set the plant between them and returned to his chair. Minutes passed. The ship hummed softly around them. Air recyclers whispered through ceiling vents. Somewhere in the cargo bay, cooling pumps clicked on and off. Then Ethan noticed it. One of the drooping leaves slowly straightened. Not dramatically, just enough to make him lean forward. Another followed. Color seemed to return to the stem itself. His eyes widened. No, Lasara closed hers. Yes. The plant continued. Improving almost imperceptibly. Not growing. Recovering. Like something remembering how to live. Ethan stared at it. Then at her. Then back again. You knew this would happen. I hoped it would not. Why? Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. For the first time since they met, genuine fear appeared in her expression. Not fear for herself. Fear of what came next. Because once people see it, she whispered, they stop seeing me. Outside the viewport, stars drifted silently beyond the station. Inside the ship, a forgotten plant stood a little taller than it had an hour before. And Ethan Carter began to realize that whatever secret Lasara carried, it was far stranger than any curse the Bazaar believed. For a long time neither of them spoke. The little plant remained on the table between them, its leaves no longer sagging beneath their own weight. Ethan stared at it while the ship's lights reflected softly across the viewport. Somewhere deep inside the Wayfarer, a relay clicked. A ventilation fan changed speed. Ordinary sounds. Familiar sounds. Yet the room no longer felt ordinary. Tell me, he said quietly. Lasara looked down at her hands. You will wish you had not asked. I doubt that. A faint, sad smile appeared. Most people do. She rose from her chair and walked toward the observation window. Beyond the glass, the station glowed against the darkness of space like a floating city of silver and gold. Hundreds of vessels drifted through carefully controlled traffic lanes. Tiny lights moved like stars with destinations. My people call us resonance, she finally said. Ethan remained silent. She continued. Very few are born. Sometimes centuries pass without one appearing. Sometimes an entire world never sees one. And what exactly is a resonant? Lasara rested her hand against the window. A bridge. That does not explain much. I know. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Life responds to us. Machines sometimes respond. Animals. Ecosystems. Even people. Ethan thought about the maintenance robot, the plant, the strange drone at the bazaar. Suddenly those moments no longer seemed unrelated. How, he asked. Nobody fully understands. She laughed softly, though there was little humor in it. Scientists have spent generations trying. Ethan leaned forward. And what did they discover? That emotional states create measurable effects. He frowned. You mean your feelings? Yes. The word hung in the air. When I am calm, systems stabilize. Living things often recover more easily. Small improvements. Small corrections. Ethan glanced toward the healthy green leaves on the table. And when you are not calm? Silence answered first. Then came a whisper. The opposite. He felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not fear. Understanding. Partial understanding, at least. That is why everyone avoids you. Lasara nodded. Many years ago, another resident experienced profound grief during a planetary emergency. Infrastructure failed. Crops died. Entire regions suffered cascading disasters. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes did not leave the stars outside. The event became legend. Ethan said nothing. People stopped seeing resonance as people. We became risks. Variables. Potential catastrophes. She turned toward him. Children learn the stories before they learn the science. The sadness in her eyes was not bitterness. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of spending years carrying a reputation created by someone else. So they abandoned you because they were afraid. They convinced themselves it was practical. Ethan looked around the ship. The repaired robot rolled through the corridor. Environmental systems were performing better than ever. Even the air felt fresher. Nothing about her presence resembled a threat. It felt like the opposite. And the bazaar? He asked. Why were they giving you away? Lasara lowered her gaze. Because nobody wanted responsibility for me anymore. The answer landed harder than Ethan expected. Not because it was dramatic. Because it sounded painfully ordinary. Like a sentence spoken by someone who had heard it too many times. Outside the viewport, thousands of stars burned silently across the darkness. Inside the Wayfarer, Ethan Carter realized that the loneliest person he had ever met was standing less than 10 feet away. The following morning began with the gentle vibration of docking clamps releasing somewhere beyond the hull. Ethan woke to the familiar sounds of station life filtering through layers of steel and insulation. Cargo haulers rumbled past. Automated announcements echoed faintly through external speakers. For a few moments, everything felt normal. Then he remembered Lasara. He pulled on a jacket and stepped into the galley. The table was empty. The chair where she had been sitting the night before stood neatly pushed in. For an instant, he thought she had left. Then he noticed the observation deck. Lasara stood beside the viewport, watching the station awaken beneath streams of moving traffic. Pale blue light from a nearby nebula painted silver highlights across her hair. She looked as though she had not slept. You are still here, Ethan said. That seems to surprise you. A little. She nodded slowly. It surprises me too. Ethan moved toward the coffee machine. The ancient device usually required several attempts before producing anything drinkable. Today it worked perfectly on the first try. He stared at the steaming cup, then toward Lasara. She pretended not to notice. This is getting ridiculous, he muttered. Before she could answer, a warning tone suddenly chirped from the ship's communication console. Ethan frowned and crossed the room. Incoming message requests rarely arrived this early. He activated the display. A station administrator appeared on screen. The middle-aged woman looked unusually cheerful. Captain Carter. That is me. I wanted to personally thank you. Ethan blinked. For what? Your maintenance report. My what? The administrator checked her tablet. The engineering department received notice that several long-standing power distribution irregularities across docking sector 4 corrected themselves overnight. Efficiency increased by nearly 9%. Ethan slowly turned his head toward Lasara. She stared firmly out the window. I am pretty sure I did not fix that. Well, the administrator said with a smile. Whatever happened, half the station is celebrating. We have not seen numbers like these in years. The transmission ended. Silence returned. Ethan looked at Lasara. She looked at the stars. Lasara. Yes. 9%. I did not ask the station to improve. That is not the point. Her shoulders lowered slightly. I know. For the first time since meeting her, Ethan noticed genuine frustration in her voice. Not with him. With herself. Do you think I enjoy this? She asked softly. Every room changes. Every machine behaves differently. Every person starts looking at me like I am either a miracle or a disaster waiting to happen. Ethan did not answer immediately, because he finally understood something important. People feared her effects, but she feared them too. A sudden commotion outside interrupted the moment. Through the viewport, workers had gathered near a cargo terminal entrance. More people joined every minute. Some pointed toward maintenance displays. Others stared at engineering reports appearing across public screens. News traveled quickly on a station this size. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. "They are going to notice," he said. Lasara closed her eyes. "They always do." Beyond the glass, the crowd continued growing. And for the first time since leaving the bazaar, Lasara looked genuinely afraid. By midday, the station was buzzing with rumors. Ethan could feel it even before he stepped outside the ship. Conversations stopped when people noticed Lasara through the open cargo ramp. Maintenance crews glanced toward docking bay 27 and quickly looked away. Data screens throughout the sector displayed reports of improved power stability, reduced equipment failures, and unexpectedly efficient resource distribution. Nobody knew why. Unfortunately, people were beginning to guess. Ethan returned from a supply run, carrying 2 bags of groceries. As he approached the ship, he found Lasara sitting alone near the observation deck. She had pulled her knees close to her chest and was staring at nothing. The repaired plant sat beside her, healthier than ever. "You skipped breakfast," Ethan said. "And lunch." "I was not hungry." "That is a terrible lie." She did not argue. The silence worried him more than any explanation could have. Outside, another wave of excited voices echoed through the docking district. A nearby cargo operator was telling anyone who would listen that his transport had passed diagnostics for the first time in 3 years. Others shared similar stories. Everywhere Lasara went, things improved. The problem was that attention was improving too. Ethan set the groceries down and took a seat across from her. "You are doing it again." "Doing what?" "Trying to disappear before anyone gets attached." Her eyes lowered. "That would be easier." "For who?" "For everyone." Ethan shook his head. "You keep saying that." Before she could answer, the ship suddenly chimed. An incoming station-wide alert flashed across every display panel. Ethan immediately opened the message. A collective gasp seemed to ripple through the docking district outside. Hundreds of workers stopped what they were doing. The alert displayed a serious systems anomaly deep within the station's central infrastructure network. One of the primary energy balancing grids had begun suffering a cascade synchronization failure. It was not dangerous yet, but thousands of systems depended on it. If the problem spread, transportation schedules, environmental controls, and life support redundancies across multiple sectors could be severely disrupted. Ethan's jaw tightened. That cannot be good. Through the viewport, they could already see maintenance vessels rushing toward distant service corridors. Station personnel flooded communication channels. Engineers scrambled to contain the problem. Yet something else was happening. Lasara's breathing had changed. Ethan looked at her. The color had drained from her face. "Lasara." She did not respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the warning display. "Lasara." Finally she whispered, "This is why they fear us." Ethan immediately understood. The station's growing attention. The crowds. The rumors. The pressure. Every fearful glance. Every whispered conversation. All of it was weighing on her. "No," Ethan said firmly. "This has nothing to do with you. You do not know that. And neither do you." Outside, emergency crews continued racing through the station. Inside, the air suddenly felt heavier. Lasara closed her eyes as if trying to make herself smaller. Ethan moved his chair closer. Not because he had a solution. Not because he understood everything. Simply because nobody else had stayed before. And for the first time in a very long time, Lasara was no longer facing her fear alone. The station remained on edge for the next several hours. Engineers worked around the clock inside maintenance corridors. Communication channels carried a constant stream of updates. Yet something unexpected happened. The feared cascade failure never spread. Diagnostic reports began showing gradual stabilization across the energy network. Backup systems synchronized correctly. Load balancing improved. Environmental controls returned to normal operating ranges. One by one, warning notifications disappeared from public displays. Nobody could explain why. Ethan sat beside Lasara on the observation deck, while the latest status report scrolled across a nearby screen. The station's chief engineer sounded almost bewildered. "We have never seen a recovery curve like this," the engineer admitted during a public briefing. "The systems appear to be correcting themselves." Around the docking district, relief replaced panic. Workers returned to their duties. Merchants reopened suspended deliveries. Travelers resumed boarding schedules. Life continued. Lasara watched the report in silence. "They will think I caused it," she said. Ethan shook his head. "Maybe some will. And maybe they will be right." Ethan looked at her carefully. "You still do not understand, do you?" She frowned slightly. "Understand what?" "The station started improving before anyone even knew your name." Lasara fell quiet. "The robot, the plant, the power systems. None of that happened because you wanted attention." Ethan gestured toward the viewport. "You were helping things long before people noticed." Beyond the glass, thousands of lights shimmered across the massive station structure. Cargo ships drifted silently between docking lanes. For the first time since he had met her, Ethan saw uncertainty replacing fear in her expression. Not uncertainty about danger, about herself. A notification suddenly appeared on the public information network. Then another, and another. Messages from station residents. Maintenance workers thanking whoever had improved their sector. Medical staff reporting unusually successful recoveries. Families sharing stories of malfunctioning equipment unexpectedly returning to service. Nobody mentioned curses. Nobody mentioned disasters. Ethan opened one of the messages and handed the screen to Lasara. A simple note from a hydroponics technician appeared. "Whoever helped stabilize Sector 4 saved 6 months of crop growth. Thank you." Lasara stared at the words. Then another message. Then another. Her eyes slowly widened. "They do not know it was me." "No, then why thank me?" Ethan smiled softly. "Because sometimes people appreciate good things even when they do not know where they came from." For several moments, she said nothing. Then something remarkable happened. The tension she had carried since the bazaar finally began to loosen. Not disappear, just loosen, like a weight shifting after years in the same position. Outside, station lights reflected across her violet eyes. "All this time," she whispered, "everyone only talked about what might happen if a resident suffered." Ethan nodded. "And nobody ever talks about what happens when one is cared for." The words hung gently between them. No speeches, no grand revelations, just a simple truth. Hours later, as artificial evenings settled across the station, Ethan prepared the Wayfarer for departure. Freight contracts waited. Routes needed flying. Life moved forward. At the bottom of the cargo ramp, Lasara stood beside the small plant that had become impossibly healthy. "Where will you go?" she asked. Ethan shrugged. "Wherever the next job pays badly enough." For the first time, she laughed openly. The sound was warm and bright, and entirely different from the tired silence he had met in the bazaar. Then she looked toward the stars beyond the docking bay. "Would it be all right if I came with you?" Ethan glanced at the endless darkness waiting beyond the station. Then at the woman everyone had feared. The woman who had spent years being treated like a problem instead of a person. "I was hoping you would ask." As the Wayfarer lifted gently from its berth and disappeared into the sea of stars, the station continued shining behind them. Not because a miracle had happened, not because a curse had been broken, but because, for the first time in a very long time, someone had chosen not to walk away. And it turned out the most dangerous thing about loneliness was never what it could do to the world. It was what it could do to a heart left completely